What's up, you guys? Welcome to another developer interview here at PSVR without Parole. With me this week, Dave Bennett, the project director at Schell Games for Until You Fall. Man, Until You Fall. How's it going, Dave?
Yeah, it's going pretty good. How about yourself?
Pretty fantastic, man. Do you know that we've been trying to set up this interview since September? That's how busy you guys have been and how busy I've been.
It's not like anything's been going on, like in the world or otherwise. So,
It's totally normal. Nice, man. Well, nice. I want to hear. There's so much I want to talk to you about. I've got like lots of questions from all the cats out there, and I've got tons of my own questions, obviously. But before we get the Until You Fall story, can we hear the Dave Bennett story? Like, what games you played growing up? Like, where did it all start for you?
Oh boy. All right. Well, let's see. I think I first started really gaming on an Apple Performa, where I played a lot of shareware games like Escape Velocity. So like a bunch of games that were on the Mac that were like other games, but not really. And so like the little kind of off-brand versions, which is kind of great. But one of my favorites was Escape Velocity, which is kind of this top-down space sim, basically, where you are flying around the universe. You're doing missions. You could be a bounty hunter. You could be a pirate. You could further a storyline, that kind of thing. It's kind of like Freelancer, but like 2D. And that was kind of the first real thing that was like, oh man, I really like these things. I was probably like 8 or something. But then going from there is like, okay, games are always part of my background, and I always loved playing games, but it was the kind of thing where I never really thought about actually getting into the industry or knew that there was an industry to get into. And so I actually was considering getting into film first. My actual like first kind of artistic endeavor was more like, oh, I'm gonna make films. I'm gonna make documentary films, which is kind of like, sure, yeah, it seemed interesting. I liked the editing process. I liked capturing the footage. I liked the interviews. And then
Did you go to school for that?
yeah. So in high school, I went to an art school basically, and it was kind of like a multidisciplinary kind of thing. And but by the time I graduated, I was like, no, I can't do this. This is not. I can't make a living like this. I'm going to go to business school. And so, so yeah, right.
Okay.
So I did that, and then about in business school, I was basically studying information systems. I was learning programming. I was learning database administration, kind of like a lot of technical skills. And with those technical skills, I kept coming back to gaming and games. And it's like I really just couldn't help myself. I was always playing games throughout this kind of period of my life. And basically I just couldn't help myself of like kind of like taking them apart, understanding how they worked, the systems behind them. It's like, oh, this is really cool. I love these things. And then by the senior year of undergrad is like, oh God, I can't do this. I really need to do something more creative and more fulfilling. So that's kind of where it's kind of decided to pivot, use all the technical skills that I built, kind of take all the storytelling basically I'd learned through filmmaking, as well as kind of just other random bits and bobs. Like throughout this time I was playing D&D, I was doing all sorts of just kind of other kind of like game adjacent activities, and learned kind of how to make prototypes and quick games, and kind of use that as a starting point to get into a graduate program at Carnegie Mellon. And so with that, starting at Carnegie Mellon, the Entertainment Technology Center, that's kind of where I took all these random skills that I thought were completely unrelated: documentary making, D&D, database administration and programming for information systems and network security, and kind of threw that all together and started using that to make games and prototypes. And that's kind of where my actual start in the game industry began.
Wow.
So it was kind of a really weird, wild ride, to be honest.
And that doesn't even get us up to date with you, really. Like what?
Yeah, I know.
What came first, Schell Games or VR for you?
Schell Games. So when I started at Schell Games, I've been here for almost, 8-9 years, looking at the calendar. So I've been here for a while now. And when I started at Schell Games, I actually started as a programmer for Flash games. Remember Flash, the thing that just died? And so I actually started as a kind of a prototype programmer. But during my time there, in addition to the programming, I was also kind of responsible for writing scripts and coming up with designs for the games. And so slowly my more technical background of like gameplay programming shifted into design. And then throughout my time at Schell Games, when I kind of fully officially pivoted to design, I basically took on more roles where like, okay, well, I'm the, for lack of better terms, creative director or project director of these different types of projects, ranging from other VR titles to running a Kickstarter for my passion project, Orion Trail, which is like a choose your own space adventure comedy game. And And so, like, again, 2D pixel art. So, like, the types of games that I've worked on during these 8 years are like wildly different. And so, most recently, I've been working on VR, like Until You Fall, other prototypes and other things I can't talk about. But it's the kind of thing where each experience that we've worked on, even though they're so vastly different, we can draw upon those things. And it's kind of a nice parallel to like how I got into the industry as well.
We need to talk about this Orion Trail thing. Was that a successful Kickstarter?
It was, yeah, and it was a Schell Games property. It was actually a basically what we do at the studio back when we all worked in the studio in the before times was we would have once a year this thing called Jam Week, and the idea is it's basically a week-long jam where everyone in the studio gets to work on something that excites them. And a group of us got together probably 5-6 years ago at this point. We're like, hey, you know what, we want to make a fun or Oregon Trail comedy like spoof game. It's like, yeah, let's do that. And it came together great. The art was amazing. The tone was just perfect. It was just bad puns with like stupid space adventures. And there was so much excitement from the team and the studio about it. It was like, okay, great. Let's figure out how we could actually fund this and make this a thing. And so that was kind of my first foray into Kickstarter and trying to run that campaign.
Were there space cadets in your game that died of dysentery?
Of course, but space dysentery.
I mean, that's
It's
the
different.
only kind there is.
Yeah, right. No, and just to give you an idea for the tone, like it's a resource management game, so you're trying to get as far as you can across the star map, and like the resources you have are food, fuel, hull, and red shirts. Like red shirts were a literal resource in the game that you have to spend. So like it was very, very tongue in cheek, very silly. I'm very happy with how it turned out, and yeah, I mean the fact that we were able to fund it successfully and then release it in like a reasonable amount of time was super great.
Dave, I've been talking to you for like 5 minutes and you're already like my new favorite person. I love everything that you're saying. This is excellent. All right. Well, let's get to Schell Games, man. Did you have any involvement in I Expect You to Die?
Personally, I did not. I helped a lot with like playtesting and just like I think everyone at the studio always has kind of their hands on their projects to some degree. Like we're always playing each other's stuff, giving each other feedback, giving just like I don't know, we're able to lean on each other, which is great. And so like whenever we have a question or something, it's like, oh man, I really don't know how to do this or what the best way to do it is. Like we'll all reach out to each other. So in that capacity, I did help out, but I was not directly on the dev team.
Oh, it sounds like Schell's like a pretty, laid back place where it's like people get to express themselves pretty well. Sounds like the jam thing went over really well. Is that kind of how this kind of developer goes from something like super narrative driven escape room game like I Expect You to Die to something that's radically different, a roguelite sword fighter? Was this the product of one of those jam sessions, or was it just like somebody just decided this is something I want to do and said, yeah, go for it? How does that work?
I think it's a little bit of both, honestly. I think there's definitely a desire. I think we'd worked on some client projects where it was getting into the space of melee combat or like flirted with the idea with it. And there were some ideas was like, ooh, we should take this further. How would we take this further? We have ideas that we can't do now or not actually appropriate for this project, but how could we do something like for the future? There's also just like, novelty is a really big important part for the studio as well. It's like finding new fun ways, especially in VR. Just to make great games. And for I Expect You to Die, we had, the escape room method, the escape room kind of style of game kind of figured out really nicely, and it was a lot of fun. And it's just kind of like, okay, great. What else can we do in this space? What else can we do in VR? And so that was part of the impetus of like, okay, let's do something completely different. But also from a kind of a practical standpoint, it's like, okay, well, how do we make a game that's can be more easily expandable? Like I Expect You to Die is expensive to make new levels because it's like you make these bespoke puzzles, you build these things, and then once you completed them, they're done. Like you can add some replayability through like kind of time challenges or like little Easter eggs and that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. But from a practical standpoint, we're like, okay, well, how can we make a game that has more legs, that is more replayable, that is more I don't know, that we can add more content to and then get a longer lifespan out of. And so that was actually kind of the impetus for making the roguelite aspect or the roguelite structure. But in terms of this melee combat, like we had a prototype pretty early on that I think was perfected in one of these jam weeks. And then that was kind of used as like, all right, well, we have this idea, we have this great core loop. Let's figure out what shape of game this fits into. And so a lot of time was then spent afterwards, kind of like, okay, well, we have combat. That's great. That's, it's solved. We're not going to put it on a shelf, but like, let's not touch that part. And how do we then, put scaffold the rest of the game around that kind of core loop.
Every time I talked about Until You Fall for the first, I guess, few days, maybe the first week I was playing it, I kept bringing up Dance Dance Revolution because as much as, as I love sword fighting in VR, and I've played, Swords of Gargantua and Swordsman and things that are, very much straightforward. Like you swing the sword and you hit the dude, and that's kind of how the mechanic works. But there's something a little bit more rhythm based here. There's things that flash up on the screen that tell you to dodge this way or that way, or or marks that say slash this direction. Is there any validity to where my head was at? Is anybody on the team a fan of these kind of like rhythm style games?
Totally, yeah. I think early on, a lot of people affectionately referred to the combat as Sword Revolution.
Nice.
And later on, we've kind of called the gameplay rhythm light because during the playtesting and as people were more and more playing the game, people were picking up on that. It's like, oh man, I think, and like there were great rumors of like, oh, I think the music's actually going with the beat of the game and the sword slashes, which it totally wasn't, but it was just working out that way because again, we'd kind of built this kind of action pass call and response combat system, and then we picked music and styled everything around it to make you like really lean into it and get excited about it. And so like we wanted to have the music, have everything, the visuals of the game push you forward into combat. Like the game works and sings it like when you are actually like fully bought in and like, yes, I'm slashing, I am following suit, I'm not trying to intentionally break the systems. And so we try to basically grease the chute to get you kind of as immersed as possible as quickly as possible.
Nice. And is the music, I mean, there's so much that makes Until You Fall a really unique game. You can't play it without saying, I don't think I've heard a game that sounds like this before. I don't think I've played a game that looks like this before. How much of all of this is you're doing? You're the project director. You're sort of like pointing at people and going, do this, do that, right? Like, were you like, I'm choosing the music, or how did this all kind of come to be?
I think the music was kind of one of my first major kind of like, hey, we're going in this direction. I think my original goal, and working with the other directors who were like awesome at what they do and like real master, like I don't know, the team that we had was excellent. I can't stress that enough. And so like a lot of credit for the actual details of like how it looks and how it feels goes to them. Like I was definitely my attention was so split that I was more like the kind of bigger picture guy, which is both great and frustrating at times because I really want to get in there and do stuff, but I can't. But in terms of the music, that was kind of the first thing where like, all right, like the flag in the ground on a place. It's like, all right, this game should make you feel awesome. You should feel like a badass magical knight, and you're gonna wreck everyone, and you're gonna be awesome. You're not starting from some chump to becoming the hero. You are starting from a hero, and you literally become a god. So like, you should like as soon as you put on that headset, you should feel powerful. And so one of the first ways we want to do that was with the music. And basically what I was looking for is that basically I looked into a bunch of different genres. I half jokingly pitched like third wave ska because it's like, it gets you amped. It's really exciting. And it's like kind of silly. No one else went for that. That's fine. I've made my peace. But I was looking at stuff like rock and roll. Like, do we go for more straight epic fantasy? And then there's kind of this hands on desk or on table and like, oh, dang moment when I kind of pulled up some synthwave. I think it was Mega Drive was kind of the first reference track that I pulled, and it was great. It was dark. It had this kind of nice preparing for violence feeling. It's kind of like this thing. It was this thing where it's just like, oh damn, like there's some crap that's gonna go down. I gotta get ready. And then in that vein, we looked at like Carpenter Brute and other songs where like it's all there. It's like getting your blood rate up. It's I don't know. Hotline Miami is a great example of like a game that uses that music perfectly. And it's all about getting, your adrenaline up, getting your basically trying to get into a flow state and trying to make you feel as again get let that grease shoot, make you feel awesome and as immersed as possible, and then the music's there to back you up and then keep you going and kind of sets the tone and rhythm that you should be fighting at.
That's great, man. That's great. Now, you sort of touched upon this a little bit, talking about how can you create a game that's easier to expand upon than I Expect You to Die. And so Donatello, the Scientist Game Cat, one of our viewers, he sent a question in for you saying, are there any plans for DLC for Until You Fall, or is there any future PSVR projects you can tell us about? Oof, the second half of that question is a loaded one.
Yeah. Let's see. There's nothing I can officially tell you yet, but yeah, like I said, this game was always designed to be expandable. So really, it's about finding the opportunity and when we have the people available, when we think that we have something that will basically be I don't know, right for the right time. So nothing official announced just yet, but like definitely know that we're thinking about it.
Nice. Yeah, I've been such a platinum trophy hunter lately. So when I saw the trophy list and I saw that the campaign was referred to as the Shattered Woods campaign, I was like, oh, why would you name it something if there wasn't going to be another campaign later that's going to be named something else? Otherwise, it would just be the Until You Fall campaign. I was like, sweet. So I got really excited when I saw that, just from a personal
I'm
standpoint.
glad that you picked up on that. The Patrick, our design director, also noticed that I'd named the achievement that way. He's like, oh, I see what you did there. I'm like, yeah, that's right.
Right? A little Easter egg for
Yeah.
all the trophy hunters. This is a totally random question, but I've got to ask:
Yeah.
Is Jesse Schell the smartest person you know?
Yes? Question mark. I mean, I'm not just being paid to say that, but yeah, no, he's scary smart. To be totally honest, I think it's
fascinating.
He's an awesome dude. He's also just great to work with, and he's completely approachable. That's the thing, is that I think I don't know, there's always this like this level of status that it's like, oh man, I don't know if I can ever approach this person. Like, am I even worth? Can I even really like reasonably spend my time talking to him? Is I'm just wasting his time? Like, no, he's just approachable. He's just a really great guy, and we're really lucky that he's our CEO.
That's awesome. That's really awesome. All right, man. Are you ready? We've got a ton of questions from the community. All the game cats out there. We're like, oh my God, you're talking to somebody from from Schell Games. Let our voices be heard. And the first one comes from original Uber Bitch, the bearded game cat. It says, did you draw inspiration from Sailor Moon for the design of the spell sword charm?
I wouldn't put it past our artists. I'm not explicitly aware, but honestly, like, I can't not see the resemblance now. I mean, like, that thing is just basically all you gotta do is put that in your hair, you're good to go.
Please pass the question along, and maybe
Oh,
when
absolutely.
this thing airs, you can answer in the comments or something.
I will say that I can't remember which anime specifically, but anime was used as kind of a touch point for like, hey, here's how we make this feel bombastic and awesome. I don't know about Sailor Moon specifically, but like, this is an anime, but we definitely had, when you crush the reward, like, kind of I have the power moment.
Mm-hmm.
So
that has such a good feeling.
Yeah. So I will pass that along though, about Sailor Moon specifically.
All right, I'm going rogue. This question comes to you from me.
All right.
What other roguelites or roguelikes did you play while developing this? Did you take inspiration from other ones just to be like, oh, what can we do that's similar to this?
Oh yeah, I mean, that was a really important part once we kind of pivoted and decided that this is, hey, let's make a roguelite. Let's make sure the team's familiar with the genre. And so, like, we had a bunch of people that were already familiar with roguelikes and other rogue-ish games. But we all sat down together to play Everspace. We played Slay the Spire was big at that time, because that was like, what, 2-3 years ago at this point.
It was huge.
And it was like it just hit early access at that point. So it's like, oh dang, there's a lot of good references here. In the middle of development, like when it was too late to do too much more or change too many things, Hades came out, and it's one of those things like, God, this game is so good and it's doing everything so right. Damn, this is awesome. Let's see what else. Binding of Isaac definitely came up. There was
so
also
good. I spent hundreds of hours in that game.
Oh yeah, that's the thing to strive for. Like, that game is infinitely replayable.
And Spelunky. If you tell me you like Spelunky.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah.
All right.
So I think those are probably the big ones. I think there are other, like, basically we just tried to look for whatever reference made sense. And there was also, like, we also looked into other melee combat games and like non-VR games as well. Like, how do we make the melee combat work? But in terms of roguelites, those are probably the biggest ones.
You said Hades came out when it was too late to make any changes. Are there any changes, Hades related or not, that you would have loved to have done Until You Fall?
I mean, yes. I think let's see. I think there's more variety in weapons would be awesome. Like, we focused on swords or not even swords, but just like one-handed melee weapons. Like, two-handed melee weapons would be great. Finding a way to make bows work in our game would be awesome. I think for me, my white whale is probably just finding a better way to have more narrative be injected. The way that Hades does its storytelling through the repeated runs and like acknowledges the fact that you're just dying repeatedly over and over again is just so brilliant. and I would love to, whatever future content or other release or new game, whatever, like if we make another roguelite like this, that's a great kind of touchstone for any future kind of storytelling in this structure of game. So that's probably the biggest thing for me. Just want more lore.
I have so few complaints with Until You Fall, but one of the things that I love so very much in so many games are permanent stat upgrades.
Sure.
So like just movement speed or just general strength, defense, all that stuff. Being able to say, okay, well, I have to do this whole thing all over again, except this time, boom, 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 boom. I'm suddenly 5 times stronger. That kind of stuff.
We tried to do that with a weapon, but we also had like systems imagined where it's like, oh, maybe there's like a mask you put on that's kind of like just a flat stat buff. So it's like, okay, now your dashes are faster or you have more health, that kind of thing. Like basically having a third way to kind of define your class, because there's not like really a class selection system in this game. It's more just about like, yep, pick your 2 weapons, figure out how to make them work together. You'll get traits that kind of define how you play during the run, which like is a lot of fun, and it's always just really, I don't know, I enjoy that kind of chaos. But there's always like, we definitely feel like there's that one more thing that we wanted to add, and like one more way for the player to express themselves.
Nice. Back to our viewer questions. XPacerX asks, make sure you ask Schell Games if the PSVR 2 dev kit is easier to work with than the PSVR 1 dev kit.
No comment.
Next question from Delirium Drew VR. He says, what did they do to achieve the flow in the game? It's amazing, and I wonder if they could share any influences for the pace and speed and just overall awesomeness of the game.
Sure. I think we talked a little bit about the music, so that was definitely kind of the thing that sets the speed. And so like at the beginning of the room, we have that kind of like, okay, prepare for violence. It's going to get messy. And then during combat, that's really we kind of like, okay, like keep fighting until everyone else is either until you fall or until they all fall. And basically with the music backing you, we tried to make sure that basically like all the ways that you interact with the systems, like Patrick likes to describe it, or design director likes to describe it as making the most fun way to play the most optimal way to play. And so that was kind of the thing, is like we want to encourage you to not wiggle, not only because it's like not cool, but it also just doesn't work. And so like there's a lot of subtle things we did where it's like, okay, well, if you try to waggle your sword a lot, eventually it will just stop working and you won't get any feedback. Going for the choreographed like block and attack angles, like we made bigger swings do more damage, not only because it makes you feel cool, but also makes you look cool in real life, but it also works the best for the platform. So like VR tends to work better when you're taking bigger, more exaggerated swings. And so that all makes it feel like it's working, and it makes you feel like you're being a badass, and it makes you kind of allows yourself to kind of imagine yourself as kind of the movie sword fighting rather than actual sword fighting. Mm-hmm. That was kind of the thing. It was like early on we tried to look into like, okay, well, let's make this realistic. And it's like real sword fighting, and we got a lot of sword fighting experts to tell us like, here's how you actually sword fight. And we prototyped that stuff, and it just didn't feel as good as we'd hoped it would. And so we kind of leaned into more like, okay, let's go for the movie kung fu, the movie sword fighting that like it feels the way you think it would be based off of media you've consumed, rather than necessarily like how actual sword fighting works. And so with all that combined, it really came down to like, okay, well, with the attack, block, and dodge system that we have, we figured out we can really dial up the speed of combat. And so we have music that backs that, makes you like, again, just kind of feeds into itself. And it was really about them just, again, rewarding that good play behavior. And then the more you do it, the better you get, the farther you get, the more rewards you get, the bigger your sword gets, that kind of stuff. So like, I don't know. It was all about just kind of like subtle encouragement to make sure you're playing the way that the game wants to be played.
Yeah, it does feel good, and it plays great. Did you have any problems getting, obviously it didn't come to PSVR first, but, with the light tracking and the move controllers and no analog sticks and all the stuff that, small hurdles to overcome for players, I'm assuming are much bigger hurdles to overcome for developers. How did that all work for you?
It just took time, frankly. I think the big thing was the first big question was like, okay, well, we can't do all these post effects on the PlayStation or even the Quest. Like these were things we're like, okay, well, let's figure out how we can still keep the game style without just making it look like a worse version of the game. And we're pretty I'm really happy with how that turned out. Like we basically were able to make a new, almost a new style for this game that made it feel just as bombastic and excellent. And so there was that kind of first like artistic side of like, hey, how do we make something that we're still happy with that still feels like Until You Fall, as well as just like, okay, well, what are our budgets? And like we have to be really strict with like, hey, what are we spending our milliseconds on for physics, for art, for effects, and like, it's like, hey, you have 11 milliseconds, so you gotta make it work. And it's like, oh damn, okay. And so there was that side of it, but I think in terms of the gameplay, like, yeah, I wish that the controllers had thumbsticks, or that more of them had, because I know that they have one that has a thumbstick, but that's not like widely used. Mm-hmm. So coming up with a movement scheme that still felt good. In terms of light tracking, it actually worked pretty well. Like, again, because we had encouraged players to take bigger, wider motions, the tracking worked better. And so there was just some more fiddly adjustments on the back end of like, okay, well, let's make sure that, how much do we need to multiply the swing strength by on the PlayStation versus another platform? And there really wasn't that many changes we needed to make per platform to make the game function. Like pretty much the same game on the PC, on the Quest, on the PlayStation, like all that stuff in the back end is still basically the same.
Excellent. Dave, we're just about out of time, but before we go,
yes,
is there anything you can tell us that we wouldn't know, that maybe you have never told anybody about Until You Fall? Story from development, something that got left on the cutting room floor, anything.
I'm trying to think of stuff if I haven't told before. I think, okay, let's see. Some of the early prototypes that we did for combat that we end up having to cut because it just added too many complications that I would love to try to get into for a future release at some point. This is not a promise. But early on, we had a lot of questions about ledges and like, okay, well, what if the arena had like, we like a couple of levels we have are like bridges, for example. You may note that there are a lot of, walls there to prevent you from walking off, and some of the later ones actually don't have those walls, but you can't leap off. But there was a lot of questions like, hey, could I just shove a guy off a ledge and kill him? Or can I leap across ledges and stuff like that? And so we had a lot of prototyping done where it's like, okay, well, what if I bop the guy and he just falls off and he dies? Like, that's cool, yeah, but it's too powerful. Because it's like, I'm the guy with 8 health bars, and then you just dash into him and then he falls over. It doesn't really work. And similarly, we also had like, small gaps where you could dash across, and that felt pretty cool. And so enemies would have to chase you and jump across. But that it introduced so many issues and so many other things we'd have to solve and fix that was just like, okay, like let's not deal with this right now. Let's make sure that the rest of the game feels good and works. So yeah, I don't think that's something that we've widely talked about, but that's, that was a prototype that we made early on that we had to cut.
I love it, man. All right, man. Before we go, can you give me a big ol' meow for all the game cats out there?
All right. You want an actual meow? Like how? What are we talking here?
Oh man, you're a creative person. Make it creative.
Oh man.
Yeah, make it your own.
Meow.
Oh, it's very nice. It's very nice. We're gonna clip that and put it all over Twitter.
Please, yeah.
Dave Bennett, this has been an awesome time hanging out with you and learning more about you and your game, of course. I hope it's selling well, and I can't wait to hopefully see many more campaigns. I've already got the names of all the campaigns worked out in my head. Like
okay,
the crazy city. It's like, watch out for the taxi cabs. It's all sorts of crazy stuff.
Yeah, it's literally just New York. It's weird.
Right. It's half Frogger and half sword fighting.
Yeah, nice.
Man, hopefully we can catch up at some point and talk a little bit more. But really, thank you so much for hanging out today.
Absolutely, and I do think very soon we'll be making another announcement, like a cool announcement about something tomorrow, I believe. I don't know when this is going out, so you might not even.
What? No, this is going to go out after the announcement. It's totally messed up.
Yeah, it's wild. So I guess, people in the future, you'll know already, but I can't say it yet.
Yeah, guys, wasn't that announcement on Wednesday awesome? We're all very excited about it.
Yeah, it's excellent. Yeah, I loved it.
Awesome. Dave, thank you again. Have an awesome day.
And thank you too. Take care.